In this Integrative Sciences Hub module, we will talk about intermittent fasting and we will look at how to change from anabolic to catabolic pathway, or in other words, from a sugar-only to a fat metabolism, how to introduce a ketogenic lifestyle and intermittent fasting. In the previous video, we saw that by eating many times a day and by mainly eating carbohydrates, the body tends towards anabolism, or in other words, burn sugars. This activates insulin and favors the accumulation of fat in adipose tissues and visceral inflammation. We also saw that anabolism is inflammatory because it favors cellular and bacterial replication, activating the immune system even when it is not strictly required to fight inflammation. In the long term, this can cause chronic inflammation that is at the core of all diseases that have become widespread today, such as food intolerances, allergies, diabetes, migraines, thyroid disease, heart attacks, strokes, depression, neurodegenerative disorders such as Parkinson's disease, Alzheimer's, cancer, and so on. A second, far more effective and energy-efficient pathway is catabolism, a metabolism that is activated by burning fats that have been either introduced by our diet or stored in adipose tissues, triglycerides. As we saw, catabolism is an anti-inflammatory process as it favors the catabolism of fatty acid, thus reducing inflammatory visceral fat, cell repair, and the production of energy. So, what are the strategies to shift from anabolism to catabolism and reap all the advantages? Most people dieting mainly want to lose weight. Typically, however, after an initial phase of weight loss, they complain that scales stop moving and they struggle to keep up with their diet plan. Why is this? Why do most diets fail? Why do we tend to give up after a few months? And why do we regain the lost weight shortly after quitting and often put on a few extra kilos? Diets usually focus on calorie intake. If the basal metabolism of a 70-kilo person is around 1,600 kilocalories a day, but eating fewer calories, 800 calories per day, it follows that there are maybe weight lost. Fewer calories should mean less fat gain and more weight loss. This is not exactly true. A basal metabolism of 1,800 kilocalories per day is key to ensuring the person's survival. Those calories are required to carry out the body's core survival processes: breathing, heart rate, nervous system activity, circulation, digestion, movement, and so on. If we simply take those calories away from the body, reducing the overall quantity, say 6 grams of pasta instead of 110, or 20 grams of bread a day, or a small plate of white rice, the brain will eventually refuse this diet and it will end. It is the brain that manages the situation. When food is scarce, it doesn't understand that we are dieting. It tries to salvage the situation by abandoning the diet and putting on all the lost weight in case of future periods of starvation. Losing weight, being healthy, and most of all maintaining our new weight once that excess kilos have been shed requires more than simply reducing calories. It is necessary to maintain the required calorie intake to support the body's energy levels, changing the type of calorie consumed. What does this mean? Eating the same amount of calories of pasta, steak, or cheese has a radically different metabolic effect on our body. Carbohydrates, proteins, and fats all activate different metabolic pathways. We can sum this concept up saying that sugars always activate anabolic metabolism, while fats activate catabolic metabolism. Excess protein activate anabolic exactly in the same ways as sugar. Protein balanced with fats activate catabolism. Traditional diets do not take into account inflammatory elements as we previously analyzed. If we introduce fewer calories than those required by basal metabolic rate, but these calories all come from carbohydrates, legumes, or proteins in most traditional diets, we therefore always only activate the sugar inflammatory anabolic metabolism. In addition to this, although we are eating less in terms of calorie, we eat 5-6 times a day. Many diets suggest we eat little and often snacking throughout the day. We never provide the body with a chance to lower insulin levels, shut down anabolism and inflammation. So how can we maintain an adequate energy intake, move to the catabolic pathway, reduce inflammation, and lose weight? A winning strategy to activate catabolism and maintain basal metabolic rate while synergically reducing inflammatory visceral fat is the adopting of a ketogenic diet. There is a lot of talk around ketogenic diets as well as ketogenic lifestyles and regimes, but what does this mean in practice and what are the differences? A strict ketogenic diet prescribes that 90-95% of intake is fat and no carbohydrates are consumed at all. This means that the daily intake of calories is almost entirely derived from animal fats. The ketogenic diet is very powerful and effective, and as a result of it is used in many hospitals around the world to help children with drug-resistant epilepsy, for example. Children are far more disposed to production of ketones, so this diet has a significant impact on the disease. It is not, however, a diet that is sustainable in the long term, especially for an adult who is not looking to treat this type of disease. Why is not sustainable? From a visual and taste point of view, it is very hard to only eat fats. Imagine eating lard for breakfast, lunch, and supper. The body, or better the brain, will start refusing it after just a couple of days. Adopting a ketogenic lifestyle, on the other hand, means adopting a nutrition style that is mostly, but not exclusively, based on fats. The concept of ketogenic diets and lifestyle are often used incorrectly. A ketogenic lifestyle prescribes a daily intake of 70% fats, a small portion of sugars and carbohydrates, say about 10%, and a remaining 20% protein. As we will see, this type of diet not only favors a number of very useful processes for the body, but it is also visually enjoyable and tasty. When we adopt a ketogenic lifestyle and reduce our intake of sugars or carbohydrates to 30-35 grams a day, balancing the intake of proteins and increasing fats, the body not only starts to burn fats introduced through our nutrition, but those accumulated in adipose tissue. When we stop introducing mostly carbohydrate, insulin starts to go down. Insulin is activated by the pancreas when blood sugar levels peak and is critical to helping distributing sugar, glucose, to all the organs, muscles, and tissues. Insulin also has an anabolic effect favoring the accumulation of excess carbohydrates in the form of triglycerides. Glycemic levels tend to rise after a large meal, and the pancreas produces insulin to enable the disposal of circulation glucose. Glucose cannot circulate long as it can damage vascular endothelium. Excess glucose is accumulated in the liver, in part in the form of glycogen and an energy resource that is ready for use, while the rest is packaged off in the form of triglycerides, the fat that is typically stored abdominally and viscerally. Fat-burning enzymes are highly sensitive to insulin. Each time it increases, insulin inhibits the lipase enzyme that is sensitive to hormones in instance to insulin and would enable hydrolysis of fat, transforming triglyceride in glycerol and fatty acid. This process is called lipolysis. To simplify, therefore, each time that we introduce carbohydrates or an excess of proteins, insulin increase, hinder lipolysis, and the body burns no fat at all. What do we mean by excess protein? As you know, proteins are critical to our body as they enable to carry out a series of primary activities, as well as building the core structure of our cells and tissues. Proteins, however, if consumed in excess, are first transformed into sugars and then in fat, just like carbohydrates. Eating 1 kilo of sugar of steak, therefore, results in the same outcome, an accumulation of fat in adipose tissue. If we mainly consume fatty foods, such as butter, cream, eggs, cheese, meat, and fatty fish, insulin levels will be very low and lipase will activate, triggering the body to burn all the fat it can, both introduced to our nutrition and accumulated in fatty tissues. When the body starts to understand that we are changing nutrition style, it also changes its epigenetics and alters the expression of its genes, halting the production of enzymes for sugar metabolism and producing enzymes for fat metabolism. This is not an immediate effect. It takes time and a little patience. Epigenetic change can only take place as a result of a constant and lasting stimulus. Not eating carbs one day is not very useful, as the body has no time to adapt and insulin levels remain high. In order to switch to a ketogenic lifestyle, it is necessary to drastically reduce all carbohydrates or sugars, balance protein, usually 1 gram per day per kilo of body weight, and increase fats for at least 15-20 days. Obviously, the speed of transition from one metabolic pathway to the other depends on a series of individual elements. Each body has its own response time, depending, among other things, on state of health, resistance to insulin, lifestyle, and so on. In practical terms, all carbohydrates, such as bread, pasta, rice, corn, flours, biscuits, pizza, focaccia, jam, fruit juice, sodas, and legumes, need to be drastically reduced, if not entirely eliminated. By contrast, you will need to lay the table full of high-quality fatty meats, fatty and mature cheeses, white fish, salmon, eggs, mollusks, avocado, butter, extra virgin olive oil, coconut butter, vegetable walnuts, almond, and hazelnuts, and so forth. The body will benefit from both an inflammatory point of view as states of inflammation will noticeably diminish and in terms of taste and enjoyment. In addition to this, fats also provide far more energy than sugars. Thanks to beta oxidation, a complex metabolic pathway that takes place within cell mitochondria and helps deconstruct fatty acids with the production of acetyl-CoA, fat produce a large amount of ATP, in other words, a great deal of energy. Mitochondria, the energy powerhouses of all our cells and especially of neurons, thus have more energy at the end than when using glycogen. A fatty acid can produce up to 400 ATP molecules compared to a glycogen molecule that can only produce 36 ATP molecules in Krebs cycles. Neurons and the brain will thus have more energy to manage emotion, memory, learning, and so on. The same applies to muscles and other organs. A ketogenic lifestyle enables us to burn fat and lose weight. But adopting a diet that is fat-based is not enough to produce ketones. Ketones are, in fact, fat metabolites that are produced by the liver only when the level of insulin produced is extremely low and there are a lot of fatty acids available. The strategy to favor ketone production is fasting. The word fasting is often off-putting. A lot of inexperienced people think that not eating for a day or even skipping a single meal is damaging for the body. In reality, we are all professional fasters, although we don't know it. At night, when we don't eat, insulin drops while levels of other hormones that are antagonists to insulin, known as counter-regulation hormones, increase. These are glucagon, adrenaline, and cortisol, and they favor lipolysis and the production of ketones. This process is extremely important because during the night, if we don't eat, we momentarily pause the sugar anabolic pathway, favoring cell repair and anti-inflammatory processes. It is therefore clear that the longer this phase of food abstinence lasts, the longer for the body to recover. Ketones play a critical role on our body. There are 3 types of ketones: acetone, acetoacetic acid, and beta-hydroxybutyric acid, which is the most used by body, especially by the brain. When the liver receives large quantity of fatty acid derived from fat lipolysis, it transforms some in ketones for the brain as main energy source instead of glycogen. The brain cannot use fat directly, but it can use beta-hydroxybutyric acid as a source of energy and as a building blocks for cell membrane construction, myelin sheath, and so forth that are composed mainly of fats. When beta-hydroxybutyric acid levels increase, the brain stops mainly work on glycogen and starts to burn beta-hydroxybutyric acid. If during the anabolic lifestyle the brain uses 100% glycogen to function, in a ketogenic lifestyle combined with fasting, it can use up to 30% glycogen and 70% ketones in the form of beta-hydroxybutyric acid. Over the last few years, thanks to the new technology, we have discovered that ketones, once demonized, are a natural part of the body's physiology and hold numerous advantages. By reducing inflammation levels in the body and providing huge amount of energy, ketones favor brain functioning, mental and brain performance, are excellent mood stabilizers, improve sporting performance, and sensory perception, like vision, taste, smell, and so on, reducing the sense of hunger, favor the increase in mitochondria, and therefore more energy, regulate genetic expression, and various other important functions. How do we start intermittent fasting? First of all, to start intermittent or prolonged fasting, is important to train the body to use fats as a source of energy. It is therefore important to first shift to a ketogenic lifestyle that enables the activation of lipases and fat burning, and only later introduce fasting. To start intermittent fasting, it is initially enough to skip breakfast. Skipping breakfast is simple because it means increasing nighttime fasting. In addition to this, morning hormone levels tend to make it easier to skip a meal. Once you are used to skipping breakfast, you can start skipping lunch and then supper. During fasting, the body uses accumulated in fatty tissues as an energy source. This means reducing body weight as well as inflammation levels. It also increases the production of beta-hydroxybutyric acid, which brings all the above advantages. In conclusion, we can say that if we combine a ketogenic lifestyle with intermittent fasting and physical aerobic activity, such as, for example, walking, running, or cycling, we will get even better results. Aerobic activity, in fact, favors the consumption of fats and works in synergy with a ketogenic lifestyle and fasting. A lot of marathon runners and sport professionals have adopted this lifestyle to improve their performance.